Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Downing and this is my flight scenario presentation for baseball trip. So a quick summary of the topics I'll be covering this presentation. First we'll go over the flight scenario. Next, some things to consider and some red flags with this trip. Next, pre-flight planning and preparation, so some performance data, accelerate stop distance, accelerate go distance, which is going to be specific to multi-engine aircraft, and then the cruise data as well. Next, some special considerations in terms of diverting or loss procedures. Next, we'll go over a little bit of single pilot resource management, or SRM, the PAVE checklist. And then lastly, we'll go over aeronautical decision making and how we would utilize the 5P checklist for this flight. So a quick overview of the flight scenario. You and a friend are planning to make a 200-mile trip to a professional baseball game. Your boss has asked you to drop off a business proposal at the branch office there and has given you the company twin to use for the trip. The weather is forecast to be VFR for the flight to and from the baseball game. Plan a VFR cross-country flight, analyze weather charts to make a go, no-go decision, and discuss task, risk, and automation management as it pertains to takeoff, climbs, cruise, approaches, and landings in multi-engine cross-country flight operations. And I chose Lakeland to Savannah, Georgia, which is about 250 nautical miles, so it's pretty close to the 200-mile trip. So some things that we need to consider for this trip, some red flags are going to be the weather. We're going to be trying to remain VFR, so that's going to make our weather pre-flight planning much more important than it would if we were flying IFR. Also the performance requirements, so fuel requirements, day VFR we know is going to be flying to the destination and then plus 30 minutes at cruise. Night's going to be to the destination plus 45 minutes at cruise. And then some things that we can consider, we can file a VFR flight plan. This is going to aid situational awareness, and we could possibly get help from ATC, and we could have help if we feel lost at any time during the flight. So quickly going over the normal takeoff distance kind of charts in the POH for pre-flight planning and preparation. It's going to be important to know our ground roll and takeoff distances. This is going to be much more important in multi-engine aircraft because of engine failure possibilities, and just the distance is going to be longer than if we were in a single engine airplane. So we're going to need longer runways at our airports for increased safety margins. Next, in our aircraft, it would be important to know the accelerate stop distance. So this would be an engine failure on the takeoff roll at a specific speed, reducing the throttle to idle, and then using max brakes to come to a stop. And this is going to be the total distance that we would take up because of that. This is going to be really important because if we're taking off from a short runway, we might not have enough distance to stop before going off the end of the runway. Also, we have the accelerate go distance, so this is going to be at a certain speed, experiencing engine failure, but continuing the flight, and this is going to show us the total distance to clear a 50-foot obstacle, which in some cases we can see is in excess of 10,000 feet, so we might not even have enough distance once we rotate to even clear any kind of obstacle that's at the end of the runway. And then next, some cruise performance data. So here we can see we would want to know this information for achieving the proper fuel burn, and also the proper RPM and manifold pressure settings that we would need at our specific altitude and given temperature for that day. We don't want to overperform the engine. We don't want to prematurely wear out the engine components, wear and tear on the engine components. We also want to know our true airspeed for planning purposes. So this would be an important chart for us to get those values. So some special considerations, if we're going to need to divert during this flight, it would be really important for pre-flight planning for us to start to pick out those airports where we know we're going to be able to get fuel if we have maintenance issues, hangar storage, and then we also have the proper runway requirements. We don't want to be landing out in the middle of nowhere at an airport that doesn't have fuel and that we can't take off from. And then also loss procedures, so we want to make sure we're carrying current charts either on our iPad or paper charts. We'll also have the avionics on the aircraft. And if lost in Florida, we're just going to be following the coast up to Savannah anyway, so it's going to be pretty hard to get lost that way. And then if we do end up filing a VFR flight plan, we can always ask ATC for help. They're not above helping us out if we need them for anything, so that would be a really good asset to have while we're flying. And then if we were going to plan the weather, do the weather pre-flight planning for this trip, it'd be important to go big and then work our way in. So we're going to look at the bigger picture, so bigger, larger areas, and then look at smaller areas such as specific airports. All the weather information we can get from aviationweather.gov, or we can call 1-800-WEATHER-BRIEF in order to get a briefing, which would be really important. Also, ForeFlight could give us one if we did decide to file that VFR flight plan. So for big, we're going to look over prognostic charts, area forecast, radar summary, and then SIGMETs, convective SIGMETs, and AirMets. And then small, more local is going to be METAR, TAFs, and surface analysis. And then again, we can get that weather briefing before we go. So the first large chart that we could look at is going to be the surface analysis chart. This is going to be current weather as of the time of this chart's printing date. So it's not going to be a forecast, it's going to be current weather. On here we can see locations of fronts, high or low pressure areas. We'd also see hurricanes. And then sometimes it'll also show us rain. We can also see troughs and the isobars and stuff like that. So again, big picture, and then we'll work our way in. Next, we could go to the aviation forecast. This is going to show us a bunch of things. So it's going to be a forecast, obviously, for the whole contiguous United States. We can see that we have wind barbs. There's also going to be areas of precipitation, which we can see some of the symbols that I've shown off to the right for rain, drizzle, or snow. And this is also going to show the probability of thunderstorms. So we can see at the specific time for this specific chart, we can see in Florida there's going to be the possibility of some thunderstorms around the state. And then we can see in the Midwest as well. So this is going to be more of a forecast of a big area, which is what we want. And then we'll start working our way in. Next, we have the radar summary chart for Florida, which we could see from the previous, the aviation forecast, that there was the possibility for some thunderstorms. And we can see that all the areas that they were predicting that there's going to be thunderstorms if we were to leave at this specific time. So the radar summary is going to show us exactly that. It's going to show us a summary of thunderstorms and other precipitation, large clouds in specific areas. And then the last big thing that we would want to look at is convective sigmets and sigmets, which we can see we have a couple around Florida. Sigmets and convective sigmets are going to be areas where there's going to be bad weather. And there's a bunch of factors that go into that. We can also see there's going to be some thunderstorms. We can see off the coast that would not be a factor to most aircraft. But these kind of areas we might want to try to avoid as much as possible if there were going to be sigmets or convective sigmets on our within our route of flight. VFR might be difficult. We might either have to file IFR or have to divert around the weather, because these are going to be areas that are going to be associated with pretty bad weather. And then, so working our way in, bigger picture to a smaller picture, we can see at specific airports. We can see METAR. So METAR is going to be a meteorological aerodrome report, and this is going to be weather within the vicinity of the airport. And these are going to be updated hourly at 55 minutes past the hour. So for Lakeland in particular, we can see the time that it was published. We can see the wind, the visibility. We can see any cloud cover, temperature, dew point, and then the altimeter setting for that airport. Next, we would have a forecast. So the Terminal Aerodrome Forecast, or the TAF, is going to be a forecast for an airport within a 5 statute mile radius. So this is going to be good if we were planning on this 200 nautical mile cross country and it's going to take us a couple hours to get up there. This is going to be a pretty good representation of the weather that we might be able to expect later in the day. So they can be either forecast for 24-hour or 30-hour periods. 30-hour periods are going to be for larger airports. And then we can see for Lakeland in particular, for this one, we can see that it's going to be from the 10th at 1800 Zulu to the 11th at 1800 Zulu, and then the weather that would be associated. That these weather forecasters are forecasting for this area during those times. And next, single pilot resource management would be really important during this flight, because we're going to be conducting it on our own. We're going to be planning for this particular flight would be key, because it's going to be conducted VFR, so planning is going to be really important. Weather is going to have to be better than if we were just going to file IFR. And then SRM is the art of managing all onboard and outside resources available to a single pilot before and during a flight to help ensure a safe and successful outcome. So using single pilot resource management with this scenario in particular, we could use the PAVE checklist, which is a pre-flight checklist used by pilots to identify risks associated with a flight. So the pilot is going to be the P, we're experienced in multi-engine flight. A is going to be for aircraft, we're familiar with the aircraft and its systems. Environment, so I'm extremely familiar with the departure airport Lakeland and the arrival airport Savannah, as well as the areas in between. And then we want to identify possible diversion airports along the route so we don't have to think about it when we have to make that call. And then lastly, external pressure. So we're delivering a business proposal. That's the whole point of us taking this trip, as well as the baseball game. There's going to be get there-itis, which is going to be an external pressure associated with wanting to get to that baseball game. And then lastly, we want the weather to remain fair so that we can maintain VFR the whole way up and back. And then lastly, aeronautical decision-making is going to be a systematic approach to the mental process used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action in response to a given set of circumstances. So it's important to note that 80% of all accidents are attributed to human error. We can use the 5P checklist to identify our decision-making process of different variables throughout the flight. So this is going to include the pilot, the plane, the passengers, the programming, and the plan. So when it comes to this particular flight, we can use the 5P checklist. The pilot, we're experienced in the airplane, we're very familiar with the systems. Plane. So with a multi-engine aircraft, more engines does not mean that the aircraft is safer. More engines is going to equal greater complexity and more that can go wrong. So there's more to manage inside the aircraft, means that our plane is going to have to be that much more on point and efficient before we actually leave. So the passenger, if we've worked with this passenger for any length of time, they're probably familiar with the airplane and the procedures that are needed to complete a flight. So let's put them to work, either monitoring the radios or read the checklist, whatever they're comfortable doing for us. Next, programming. So automation management, use the autopilot, avionics, and aircraft systems to our advantage. Multi-engine flights can require more automation to avoid task saturation. And then plan. It's going to be a long cross country, and we're trying to maintain VFR. So filing a VFR flight plan might be a really good option. Multi-engine airplanes mean that airport choice also becomes more important. So we're going to require a long runway, which we already went over with the takeoff distance and the accelerated go and stop distances. And then alternative course of action. So there's going to be a higher risk than normal due to planning on the weather being good enough to fly VFR up and back. If the weather's good, it should make for a good weekend and a great baseball game. We could file a VFR flight plan to be in contact with ATC throughout the flight, and they're going to be a resource to advise us of changing weather conditions, so we might as well use that resource. And we want to make sure that that business proposal gets delivered.